Welcome, you're watching Head to Head. I'm Antonina Antosha with UATV. The latest survey shows that 57% of Ukrainians support the country's entrance into the European Union these days. The number has grown by 8% comparing to last year. At the same time, the number of those who oppose Ukraine joining the EU is deteriorating. Only 17% of Ukrainians don't want to join the European Union now. Last year, the number was bigger, 28%. To talk about Ukraine's integration in the European Union, we're joined in the studio today by Mykola Kapitonenko. He is the assistant professor of the Institute of International Relations of Taras Shevchenko University. Hello, and thank you for coming.
Hello.
So the numbers I've just voiced, they are a good, positive result, right?
Yeah, they are a good, a positive result, but they will not bring us closer either to NATO or to
What will?
EU. First of all, the desire of the member states, both in the European Union and NATO, is the key precondition for Ukraine, not only for accession of Ukraine into any of these organizations, but also to getting significantly closer to any of them. Obviously,
the Ukrainian government is doing a huge amount of work to get closer to NATO or the European Union, and we had a lot of conversation about that. But what else needs to be done, in your opinion?
There are strict criteria, and to put it simply, Ukraine needs to be an effective democratic state with well-functioning law institutions and with the rights of minorities well protected, which is not the case, unfortunately. Regardless of all the attempts which are being taken by our government, Ukraine is not getting closer in democratic standards.
Would you say that the attempts are ineffective?
I would say yes, because we are not seeing a significant progress in almost 4 years. Ukraine is still ranking as a hybrid regime in the Global Index for Democracy. There are very weak state institutions. There is no, I would say, no dominance of law. So I say that my estimation is that Ukraine is not really getting better in what Americans and Europeans mean by the Western values or European values.
How can we change that?
That's a tough question indeed, because actually what you need is
I mean, clearly it's easy to say that Ukraine is not getting any closer to the organizations we want to join, but even though we're putting an effort to it, obviously it's not enough. So maybe there is a proposition what should be done.
We might look at the example of Eastern European states who have already done the kind of transition.
So we do need to take the experience.
To put it shortly, we need knowledge, expertise, and we need money, and probably we need time to accomplish all that.
How much time?
But I think 5 to 10 years would have been enough if only the other components are present. Because as we may see from Ukrainian history, in 25 years, we are still having a very ineffective political and social system, a country which is run and controlled by oligarchs, a parliament which is also controlled by oligarchs. So we have only an imitation of democracy, I would say, something which have labeled democracy on it, but no democratic institutions. And we should not think that Europeans or Americans are not aware of that. They are estimating processes, political, social processes, economic processes, which are happening in Ukraine. And there is not so much reason for optimism for them, not so much reason for supporting Ukraine further. And I don't think that we are actually much closer to the West, to the EU, to NATO, or civilizationally to the West, than we have been in 2014.
But the fact that we have the association agreement, doesn't it put us at least a little bit closer?
Yes, association agreement is a nice instrument for Ukraine to get further economic reforms, to get access to markets
to boost the economic growth.
But we are not using it properly.
And why so? Why do you think so?
Because we have a weak economy, which is a downfall. We are the poorest nation in Europe. And association agreement is for a growing economy, to get more access to European markets, to trade more. We have less resources to trade, less items to trade with the EU. So we cannot use those advantages which are offered by the association agreement. And another problem here maybe is that association agreement may actually be the final point, the final destination of the European integration of Ukraine. This may be not a step towards further or future membership of Ukraine in the EU, but a status which is offered instead of a possible membership. That cannot also be the case.
An unfair trade? Would you
There is
call
no such thing as fairness in international politics. Only interests matter. If we are not putting anything interesting on the table for the members of the EU, they will not bring us closer. They don't have to follow any standards. They don't have to be fair towards Ukraine. They just have to do what they believe is in their interests. And bringing Ukraine closer today, with all huge problems in democracy, in politics, in economics, in everything, in security, is obviously not something which is corresponding their interests.
But could that change?
That could change. Well, we are constantly living in a kind of hope. For 25 years plus, Ukrainians are hoping that something will change in the country. That probably that politicians who are coming to power will be better than previous ones, but it is not happening. That somehow, if we are believing or wanting positive changes, they will happen. That's also not enough. We need, as I have already said, we need expertise, money, and I don't like the word, but political will is something which is sometimes necessary in order to change rules of the game, in order to change the system, which is still, unfortunately in Ukraine, which is still the one we used to have before.
Would you say that the Russian hybrid war, this conflict that is going on in the east of Ukraine, is somehow in the way of Ukraine getting closer to you, or could be one of the problems that Ukraine is facing on the path?
In my view, this is rather a problem than a tool for getting closer to the West, because the conflict we're having in the East is a huge security risk for the Europeans in the first place, and for Americans as well. So when there is a conflict in a neighboring country, it generates consequences for anybody. I mean, the conflict in Ukraine is also affecting security of Poland, Baltic states, Hungary, Romania, and of the EU in general.
In general, yes.
That means that their best strategy would be to try to minimize the risks, probably to keep the conflict frozen. But under those conditions, no one will seriously talk about accepting Ukraine into the EU. So we have to certainly to think about how and at which price we are ready to resolve the issues, obviously the issues with the Kremlin, because without that, solving the conflict in the east of Ukraine would be impossible.
Is the price the giving up the illegally annexed Crimea here, or?
The prices could be actually different. So Moscow may, accepting the annexation of the Crimea is one of the variants. Returning to a non-block status, maybe another option. Providing Russia some sort of control over political situation in Ukraine, including veto right to the inhabitants in the east, who will be able to block any further attempts of Ukraine to get closer to EU or NATO. A variety of issues which may be offered by the Kremlin.
But would that be fair to all of the rest citizens of Ukraine who do want to get closer to EU?
That will not probably, again, no fairness in politics.
Yeah.
That probably will not be fair, but you have to understand that if you're willing something too much, even too much, this may not be enough, because your desire is not enough. You have to try to get support from other nations, states, peoples, and in order to do that, sometimes you have to sacrifice something which is important for you.
But still, as you say, if Ukraine needs to pay a price to Russia to get closer to EU, wouldn't it mean that the European Union, as a strong political and not only an economical organization, would show that it's not strong enough to suppress just one country, even though it is an aggressor, as Russia?
But they don't have to. Russia has not annexed any territory of a European Union member state. It has annexed Ukraine's territory. This is our problem to deal with Russia.
Where is the confidence that Russia will not try to do that?
Certainly you cannot be 100% sure of anything, but you may estimate the probability of Russia attacking any EU country or NATO member state, putting together the probability that NATO would react, that all other Europeans would react. And in my view, the reasonable estimation would be to keep that probability pretty low. That is what Europeans are sure about, that Russia will not attack. I don't think that any European politician seriously thinks that Russia is about to send tanks to Poland or to the
In
Baltics.
2008, Russia illegally annexed 2 regions in Georgia, and the international community wasn't really loud about it. So then Russia went and tried to do the same thing with Ukraine. If not stopped now, what could keep Russia from keeping doing that to other countries?
NATO and EU. Neither Georgia nor Ukraine
Why not now then?
have been members to NATO.
I know.
And they are not members to the EU. So they have not been protected by any mutual defense agreements. That is why they remained open to Russia's aggression. Unlike European states which are members to NATO and to the EU. NATO and EU are supposed to protect them, and Russia knows that. And that is why the situation will be completely different between Ukrainian and Georgian on the one hand case, and in case if Russia decides to attack any NATO or EU member.
Well, thank you for this conversation. I really hope that Ukraine does have a chance to integrate into NATO and EU. Thank you again for coming.
Thanks.
This was Mykola Kapitonenko. He is the Assistant Professor of the Institute of International Relations at Shevchenko University. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.